Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest version of Tales from Outer Space, where I take an HFY story from somewhere around the internet and read it aloud for your enjoyment. All the relevant links are down below. Like, subscribe, and all that YouTube comf to help this video and channel grow. Anyways, as always, I hope that you enjoy. I would just like to thank the following Tier 5 patrons and channel members for supporting the channel: Datamagnet and Bob the Dragon. Thank you again. And now, on to the story. The Endless, Merciless Hordes, written by Dathouen. We were arrogant. We had done this 1,000 times before. We show up to primitive races' systems, vaporize a fringe colony or a small city, and negotiate terms. It always worked. Thousands of civilizations fell to us. There is a holiday that we still celebrate called the Glorious 12, where for 12 straight days, the sun rose over the capital, a new civilization was acquiesced. Occasionally, we engaged in a more belligerent civilization, but a quick, sustained offensive has them surrendering within a few days. Once or twice, we had to eradicate a civilization entirely, burning it out with the stars forever. But this civilization, it is pernicious. We arrived at the homeworld, and they had yet to colonize any of the other planets in their systems. They were so primitive that they had not even unified under a single government. We didn't even know who to negotiate with. We vaporized the largest city that we could find, hoping the sheer volume of casualties would cow them. But instead, they grew angry. They launched percussive fission weapons at us in retaliation. It would have not been an issue, but the sheer volume was beyond what we could have imagined. From across the entire globe, from the entire revolution, the barrage continued. The projectiles were launched from tubes in the earth, buildings on the surface, and vessels submerged under the water. At any given time, there were over 100 missiles in space between us and them, and at one point, there was over 1,000. When they hit, their intensity was beyond anything that we had ever experienced. It was like they were trying to bash through the protosteel body armor with a rock. But the rock was the size of a city. The explosions rocked our armada. In more than one case, the explosions were so massive that they completely engulfed entire battle groups. We thought our shields and metamaterials would protect us, but the violence of their explosions, the density of the radioactive particles, it was too much. They actually managed to cripple our fleet, destroying over 70 ships and limiting the capability of 900 more. Why in the name of gods would they ever have an arsenal like this? Then we detected an additional 3,000 weapons scattered across the surface of the planet, with the broadcast repeating over and over. After a while, our computers were able to translate it. We would rather annihilate ourselves than submit to you. We said that we could decontaminate their world. We were going to terraform it anyway. That's when the armies mobilized. Every city suddenly had its streets filled with uniformed beings. More than 20% of the entire population suddenly was in uniform, armed and armored, patrolling the lands and seas. We had to stop, to think. We decided a ground campaign would be best. Overwhelming force of a different kind. At first, we marched through their streets, killing thousands. We made great progress, and we occupied all of the greatest cities in less than 100 days. The fighting was fierce, but our technological superiority made our casualties considerably fewer than theirs. Still, they overwhelmed us with numbers. We still had casualties. We hadn't thought anything of it, but now their population was becoming a major asset in their favor. They literally numbered in the billions. We had 1 million soldiers on the surface within the day, but we were met by a force of 2 billion. It wasn't just the soldiers. Even the civilians fought us. The children and teachers, bureaucrats and servants, everyone took up whatever arms they could find and leveled them against our people. We offered them peace, technology, access to greater and wider universe than they have ever known. They were determined, it would seem, to take that from us and have it to themselves. Then we made a mistake. A solar flare interrupted the teleportation systems, and the cosmic skidding scattered any teleportation signals between the surface and the Armada. We were no longer able to retrieve our technology. That's how we were able to maintain our technological advantage, by keeping it out of enemy hands. They killed over 1,000 of us and took everything. Within mere 7/8 of the day, they were able to disable the beacons on nearly every piece of technology they had stolen. We were only able to retrieve 23% of the lost equipment. This is when it turned over. Weapons, armor, vehicles, medical equipment, portable teleportation systems, power systems. They had a little bit of everything. The underground was somehow able to acquire this technology and adapt it in an inconceivably short time. Within another 100 days, we started hearing reports of insurgents armed with new weapons. But these weren't our weapons. No, they were worse, more vicious, more potent, and wasteful. Our weapons were designed to work almost indefinitely. Their weapons could barely survive 100 shots before the power banks needed replacement, completely burnt out. The armor they adapted was nothing but shields and a few small plates offering minimal coverage should their shields fail. Then the shields were equally powered, only able to operate for a few hours before parts would start to burn out. They had no concept of reusability. In their desperation, they did not make accommodations to conserve resources. We thought this would give us an advantage. It was a weakness. The onslaught was inconceivable. It took dozens of shots in rapid succession to collapse their shields, while their weapons not only collapsed ours, but would burn through 50 units of protosteel, and cut through our standard 2-unit protosteel plating like it was non-existent. Their weapons were powerful enough to even cut through combat vessel armor plating. The corpses of our soldiers often had a quarter of their entire bodies vaporized. It was brutality beyond anything that we had ever experienced in the million years of conquest. We called for reinforcements. 6 more armadas joined the fray. 2 years had passed since we had arrived, and our progress was not slowed. It was not halted. It was reversed. We were losing bases every month. The longer we waited, the more powerful they became. We withdrew entirely and decided that orbital bombardment was the best case. We changed our orbit to a safe distance and began bombardment. Or that is, we began firing. They had established a massive shielding system around every city. The shields were extending with every day that passed. Then, 20 days after we began bombardment, their shields fell and an instant later came back. They had managed to accomplish something that we did not fully understand, nor were we entirely capable of replicating ourselves. They had managed to reinforce their planet's natural magnetic field and converted it into a planetary shield. 9 days later, 9 more armadas joined us, bombarding the planet's shield with renewed vigor. What little information we were able to glean through the shields told us that they were installing new reactors every day. With each passing day, the shields grew stronger, more refined, more intense. Eventually, the bombardments were just costing us resources, and we had to stop. At this point, we could only look at the planet with visual senses, and much of what they did was going on below ground. What we could see was that they were fixing their atmosphere, cleaning up the pollution, building up infrastructure. It was like they were mocking us. They had gone back to their daily lives, farming, driving around, engaging in recreational activities. We called for all of the armadas. While we waited, we began establishing military bases on every celestial body that could support it. We stood by, watching for 2 more years. We thought that they were just sitting around, living their lives, ignoring us. We were wrong. They had rebuilt their economy and directed the entirety of its constructive power to advancing their stellar military capabilities. At the 2-year mark, great hatches opened up in the ground across the planet. In some places, massive turrets rose from the ground. They somehow were able to fire through the planetary shield without interrupting it, the blasts exceeding anything that we'd ever seen or dreamed of. The beams would convert 50% of the mass of anything that it struck into antimatter. Needless to say, there was no substance that could ever possibly exist that would survive that. The beams passed through our ships like they were not even there, then turned our own ships into planet-destroying weapons. The entire Third Armada was wiped out instantly when one of their vessels was struck by it. We fled to the border of the solar system, but the blasts harried us until we managed to get past the Oort cloud. They managed to destroy 27 out of the 300 of our armadas, 27,840 ships. 61,855,900 of our people were dead in the span of seconds. It was genocide. They were determined to burn us out of the stars. That's when a few hundred interorbital freighters began ferrying materials and laborers to their moon. We watched in horror as millions of these creatures built 24 star docks and began constructing an armada of their own. These star docks were large enough to build 100 ships at the same time, but they seemed to be only building a single ship each. The speed with which they built was incredible. The numbers only grew. They had massive omnidirectional 3D fabricators, thousands of them, and the millions of engineers working on these ships. Each star dock was putting out a ship every 2 months, and there was nothing that we could do to stop them. We circled their system impotently, trying to avoid their antimatter cannons as much as possible. As soon as they left the star dock, they sent 2 groups to us at opposite ends of the system, 6 ships each. Each one, as it would be known, served a special purpose. One emitted signals that interfered with our communications and sensors while firing small beams that disrupted our particle cannon blasts before they could hit a target. Another had swarms of heavily armored drones that numbered in the millions and moved with an unnatural coordination and lethality, firing unending waves of particle blasts. One had smaller, less powerful version of the antimatter cannons, but 3 of them. Another seemed to synthesize and fire hyper-intelligent missiles at an impossible rate with unerring accuracy. All armed with heavy metal antimatter, we suspect anti-mercury warheads. It took us a single conflict for them to wipe out the remaining 273 armadas. 12 ships completely outclassed and utterly obliterated 273,000 ships. These primitive beasts had made more progress in 4 years than we had in 400,000. And they were absolutely resolved to annihilate our entire civilization. They started by destroying all of our military installations, and the more than 100 million soldiers stranded in their system. We no longer could tell what they were up to, but rather the front lines between their space and ours. One by one, they visited our colonies and liberated them from our glorious empire. These loyal to the empire were destroyed, the rest were cowed. The monsters pushed steadily against our empire, destroying or stealing one system after another. They continued doing so until they reached the borders of their galaxy. It was finally at this point that they offered peace. They began installing newer cannons on nearly every planet on the border of their system. When tested, these proved to have a range of 1,000 light-years, and instead triggered small, short-lived singularities. In the 10 years of our war with them, they had outpaced us technologically, so much so that they seemed like magical beings. They advanced in literally every imaginable field, and our incursion was the catalyst. Now they dominate the entire galaxy. Their own armada is comprised of nearly 1,000 ships, and the new ones make the first ones we encountered look like pleasure cruisers. Now, as if it's really a choice, these humans offer us peace with a cannon pointed at our hearts. End of story. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you do, please consider supporting the author, even by popping over and leaving a thumbs up or a nice comment, just to show your appreciation for the story. However, if you wish to support this channel, there are links down below which will help immensely. I will see you all in the next one, And until then, I hope that you have a fantastic day. Cheers.